today's episode, I brought in my little brother Eric, and he just got himself a Sega Dreamcast this past Christmas and has been experiencing Shenmue for the first time. And he just finished playing about the first hour or so of the game. And I kind of wanted to bring him on because of all the issues with the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter that have been going on, and the fact that he is sort of the picture of another generation getting to explore it for the first time. He had just turned 3 about a few months before Shenmue came out, and around the time that the Dreamcast came out. So it's interesting to get the perspective of someone just experiencing that for the first time with a big generation gap. So what I wanted to have you talk about today is a little bit what interested you in Shenmue, what are your first sort of thoughts in playing just that first hour or so of gameplay, and what made you interested in the Dreamcast in particular?
Well, just some of the things I noticed as I was playing it today, that first hour today, I noticed there was just a lot of things you can do, and like little things. And I kind of like that because you said at one time, it's kind of like you have a life, sort of. Like you can go into his desk, you can go into places that don't really matter. And I like open world games like that. Like I've played Oblivion is one of my favorite Elder Scroll games, which is of course another open world game. And then as I went further on and you kind of get into the mystery of what the storyline is, it kind of reminded me of a newer generation game that came out a couple years ago, L.A. Noire, where you come up with all these clues to try and figure out what you want and what you want to get out of the whole mission and the whole mystery.
Like the Notebook too, kind of reminds me of that.
Right, and the Notebook and how he writes it all down and everything. You have to keep track of what you're doing. So it's really gets you into the game. I just played a game the other month called Enslaved Odyssey to the West. And the differences between the two games are really staggering, and it kind of shows how these like newer generation games are different from the older generation. Because Enslaved Odyssey to the West is definitely more straightforward. It has like some Prince of Persia elements where you play as a man named Monkey, and you climb around everything, but you can really just push the analog stick up and then press A to just keep going up. It's like really simple. The combat is fun, but it's also, again, simple. It's very straightforward. It's very easy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I died a couple times, but the fact that the game play and the whole game in general is just so simple. Whereas Shenmue is very complex, and I've been trying to get into more complex games like Shenmue.
Yeah. And that forward momentum you're talking about is not necessarily always a bad thing. Some games are better for that, but I think what you're really getting at is sometimes it's actually more fun to not know exactly what you're supposed to do and to be a little lost. Mm-hmm. And with a lot of games today, even if they're not completely straightforward, there's something like a fast travel feature or a way to turn on like arrows pointing to the next destination, and there's something missing in the journey, in the difficulty of not just accomplishing a task but finding what that task is in the first place. Right. And I think where Shenmue, what you're going to find with a lot of the story, and especially I think you've already started to figure it out a little bit, is a lot of the beauty is in the mundane, unimportant elements. Mm-hmm. I think things that really, to the scope of the story, don't really matter, and doing little things like when you finally get your job, driving a forklift and stuff, and when you try to explain things like you have to actually take a job in Shenmue or like move boxes in Shenmue too, it sounds boring, and in a way they kind of are. It's not that exciting. It feels kind of like a job, but those little mundane tasks make it feel more real, feel like you actually accomplish something when you reach a goal, mm-hmm. and they actually enrich the experience.
Right.
And I think you saw just a little bit of that so far. And what do you think as far as, because it was, I think, difficult at first to put in perspective what Shenmue is like when it came out, because you're experiencing it now for the first time in 2015, mm-hmm. someone who grew up mostly with post-Dreamcast stuff, like the end of the PS2, and you really grew up more with like the 360,
right.
I feel like, more than anything. And just even graphically trying to put that in perspective to 1999, 2000 era, the very beginning where you were like a little kid, how does it hold up, do you think, compared to games you've been playing recently as far as how it looks and how it feels?
I like the whole Dreamcast graphic style, and we were talking about that earlier today and yesterday. We were talking about how the Dreamcast kind of just like pops. you can't, like, seeing farther away, like, things a little blotchy and everything, but that's just because of the day and age it was made in.
Yeah, hardware limitations back then.
Right.
So, yeah.
Whereas the games today, you can see landscapes really far, events just look really solid, not necessarily realistic, but definitely more, like, epic and, like, very smooth. But another thing I noticed from Shenmue is that the controls are a little bit more stiff. Not like necessarily where the buttons are, but just like moving around is a little more stiff, it's a little slower. Not something I used to, and just playing today, it frustrated me within like the first 10 minutes. But then I realized it's more like the style of the game. Like, most of the games I play, or games I've played recently, you move very fast through an area. You move very quickly and very smoothly, which doesn't really give you a chance to be able to look around at your environment.
Right.
And look around at those amazing new graphics that the hardware is capable to do. And with Shenmue, because there is so much more detail to look at, like finding cassettes, just looking in drawers to see what clothes Rio has, that stilted movement and that very slow movement kind of gives you a chance to look at that. And I don't view that as a negative thing. When I first played it, today and the first time a while ago when I just played the first 5 minutes, it did seem like a negative thing at first, but as you keep playing and playing and playing just for an hour, you get used to it and you kind of like it.
Yeah, I did notice when you were playing, you were trying to run a lot more in the beginning, and then you eventually started to slow down, and you were actually stopping and looking at things, like looking at signs, looking at like people, looking at like little details or in like little corners of things, and eventually I feel like that's sort of the style and the draw of Shenmue is I like that pace, that slower pace, and things do pick up, especially as the story picks up, but it's a very deliberate pace. It's all about taking your time and just examining and exploring the little details of the world, and I think that's something that's missing from a lot of games, and I think that kind of gets into a little bit more about what drew you to the console itself, to the Dreamcast. Like, what really, besides just like knowing that me as your older brother like really enjoys it and showing you some like cool games, like what initially popped in like out to you, like what initially drew you to it?
Well, the first thing I saw of the Dreamcast was the controller, and it was really the first thing you described to me about the system, about the hardware itself. And you said it was like your number one controller of all time,
Yeah.
and I sort of agree with that. I mean, I'm just getting used to it, and it is just like the beginning of Shenmue and the controls and everything. It is something you have to get used to. But as I'm getting used to it, because I'm playing another Dreamcast game at home, Gauntlet Legends, I'm really like enjoying it. It's very comfortable in your hands. And then you started talking to me about the VMU unit, which is like the memory card. For every game you play, there's like that little image, and I thought that was like really unique. And it makes it seem to me that the developers took a lot more time in just like the little details, which makes the gaming experience so much more unique and so much more fun and enthralling. Just like little details like that. And the analog stick movement, it seemed a little loose to me. It's another thing I had to get used to was the analog stick. It was loose to me because not only does it go like forward and backward and all around in a circle, but also the analog stick itself kind of turns a little bit, which makes it looser. But once you get used to that and you start using it for a while in a certain game, you just get so used to it, you just move much more quickly.
Oh yeah, like I like it better. I feel like you actually can sort of move your way around things more smoothly and like faster than with a lot of other analog sticks. I feel like that extra little bit like of looseness, and
Right.
I really enjoy it. And is there any like particular games that stood out to you? I mean, you haven't even gotten really too much. I mean, you already like the VMU, and you haven't really gotten into a whole lot of games that really use it outside of the game itself, or with the little mini games and things like that.
Right.
And that's just an awesome feature. I mean, the closest thing is you do have Sonic Adventure, so the little like Chopet things. I don't think you've used those yet, but little things like that. And what games? Is there any games in particular that either I've shown you or that you've seen that you're looking forward to, or is there anything else that you really drew you to the system besides just like a Shenmue and things like that?
There was one game, the game I'm playing right now, I mentioned it a couple minutes ago, was Gauntlet Legends. That was originally an arcade game, and I started playing it here. It was the first time I played it with you, and 2-player, and I was like, alright, this is really interesting. And then I bought it pretty cheap, I think I bought it for like $20. It was one of the first games I got because I still have a very small inventory of Dreamcast games.
Yeah, they what Shenmue, Gauntlet Legends, Crazy Taxi, Sonic Adventure, Omicron the Nomad Soul, and what Soul Reaver?
Soul Reaver and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2.
Pro Skater 2, yeah.
Right. And with Gauntlet Legends, then I played it with my friend, and it turned out not as well because neither of us were really used to the game. We kind of died right away. But then I started playing it by myself, and I started realizing how fun it was. It's like a simple game that's just really fun to do, and I got to an extra level I found. And once I found this extra level, I kind of noticed, and it really hit me, how much detail and how much thought they put into just level design. Because I've been playing games recently, sort of including Enslaved Odyssey of the West, but also like games like Final Fantasy 13, where the path is very straightforward. You know pretty much exactly where to go. Whereas in Gauntlet Legends, there's a lot of different places you can go. I mean, there's still one endpoint you're trying to reach, but you have to like destroy hidden walls to find switches, to find traps, to find specific things you need later on in the game. And so you are constantly like backtracking, partly to heal. Like I've played the first level probably 30 times already, because that's the best way to heal. There's no other way to heal other than finding food randomly in other levels. But I just like that whole element of like the entire game is mixed together, and how just like the maps are kind of mixed together, and you have to run around, like backtrack and do all those kind of things.
I really think that the Dreamcast is going to appeal to you a lot because certain franchises, like I'd say Soul Calibur is probably one of, if not your favorite fighting game franchise, and the original Soul Calibur I really like, and you got to play a little bit of that, the original Soul Calibur, and I really feel like it holds up, especially even considering like Soul Calibur 2 or 3. I don't think they're significantly better in any way than the original.
Right.
And a lot of other just franchises, things like Skies of Arcadia, like you saw a little demo of that,
right.
And there's just so many games on the Dreamcast that I feel more than even most systems of the time can sort of bridge a generation gap, they still hold up, they still look great, and to me they are, and tell me if you agree with this at all, to me it feels like it's sort of the pinnacle of where old gaming met new gaming, where everything that had been achieved over time with old gaming, getting better storylines in games, getting more cinematic but still keeping old styles of gameplay, kind of came to a pinnacle, and all the good parts of modern gaming were sort of coming into being, but the bad parts hadn't come yet, like the DLC and everything like that. And like that to me is sort of what the Dreamcast embodies, is sort of that pure essence of the old and the new meeting.
Right. And I also find, I was just thinking about this, how there's so much original content on the Dreamcast. Like I'm just thinking of games, of course Shenmue, with the amount of detail, of course there were open world games before, but this was like taking it a step further. Most of the Dreamcast games, at least the ones that I've played, try to take things like a little step further. Like another game that comes to mind is Mach X, which is first person, not a fighting game, but you hold a sword and you see it and you go around and you fight in first person. And I played only the first stage of that game and I was hooked just because it was so original. I'd never seen anything like it. The only like first person games that I've played that are somewhat similar to that would be like Mirror's Edge, but that's more like parkour running.
That's years and years later.
Right.
And like even something like Space Channel 5, like there's something, or like Jet Grind Radio or things like that. There's just so much originality, I feel like, that it keeps a lot of that old arcadey style games that we don't really get anymore, and at the same time adding big epic games like Shenmue, or like Sakura Taisen, or like even like Omicron, which is a great like PC port. Like all these great things, I feel like it really is just every element of gaming really just put into this one wonderful package.
Right.
And there's so much going on. So really, like said, Shenmue, you're enjoying it so far? Really getting into it?
I'm really curious about the storyline, because I've probably seen the first 5 minutes of the game, the first cutscene, 10 times, probably by now, because I've seen it a lot of times here at his house, and then over at my house when
I'm actually very jealous, though, because it seems so unfair, because you're playing Shenmue for the first time now, and you'll probably play Shenmue 2 by the end of the summer before you go to college, maybe not, but you're only going to have to wait less than 2 years to play Shenmue 3. I had to wait 14, and by the time it's done, it's going to be like almost 16 years. Like, that's a little unfair, I think.
I'm pretty happy
but I'm just happy that for me, what really brings me joy is the fact that games like this can hold up to the point where someone who is almost a decade younger than me, who was barely walking and talking at all when these things came out, can experience them and enjoy them just as much, if not more, than a very modern game that came out in your teenage years. And I think a good example that you used was Oblivion, where I still think, as much of a much bigger, broader open world something like that is, I think there's actually still more interesting little details, things that are much more personal about something like Shenmue or Shenmue 2 than even something like that.
Right.
Where I think not a lot of games have gotten there. Something like the Yakuza series has gotten a lot closer to many others because it's kind of related to Shenmue. But I think as a whole, there's something about the personal, just intimate touches with Shenmue. I think that's the best word to use for that style, just that close-in camera to Ryo and holding things and moving them in your hand, and it's a very intimate game. It's something where you really feel like you're within yourself exploring and touching this world. It feels very tactile. So that's kind of my image of that. But yeah, I'm very glad you're enjoying that and getting more into the Dreamcast, and he's going to be in a few more episodes, and eventually, when he comes home from Christmas break and things like that, we'll catch up and do a whole bunch of things. So this is my brother Eric, his first time on the channel, talking a little bit about my favorite console of all time and how he's getting into it for the first time, and about Shenmue, and we'll try and get an update at the end of the summer, seeing how you enjoyed Shenmue and possibly Shenmue 2 if you get around to it. And I feel like that'll get an even cooler, bigger picture of your opinion of the game.
Right.
So, until then.